Okay, so today we're looking at a geometric sequence formula. So basically we are looking at a list of numbers, just like we have here, 400, 200, 100, and we are trying to write a rule to figure out maybe our nth term, or maybe in this case, like our seventh term here. So we have the nth term of a geometric sequence can be found using the following formula. So very similar to the arithmetic sequence formula that we did, we are going to write a sub n equals a sub 0 multiplied with b to the power of n. Okay, so what do all of these things represent? What do they mean? Move my mouse here. So remember our n is our nth term. So maybe I'm looking for the seventh term, maybe I'm looking for the 100th term. We have a sub 0, that's going to be our 0th term in our list. This would be our first term here. So imagining kind of what came before that first term. And then our b, so instead of adding a common amount each time or subtracting the same amount each time, we're going to have a common ratio is what we call this. So what are we multiplying our term number by to get to the second number in our sequence? Okay, so for this example here, 400, that is our first term. 200 is our next term. 100 is the next term. So if we're not sure what our common ratio is, it's kind of easy for us to see that, oh, we're dividing by 2, or what we would call that is multiplying by 1/2. If we're not sure how to figure out what is b, let's do that first. Basically, you just take any number that's in your sequence. Let's just take 400. We say, okay, well, it has to be multiplied with something. We call that b, the common ratio, and it has to give me my next number in that sequence, 200. So I need to know 400 multiplied with what is going to give me that next number, 200. So then if we divide by 400 on both sides, that's going to give us b equals 200 over 400. Oh, well, yeah, that simplifies to 1/2. So we say our common ratio is 1/2. Okay, so then we would need to now look at, well, what is our 0th term, the number that comes before 400 in this list? So we can take our calculator here. So we know 400 multiplied with 1/2 is going to be 200. 200 multiplied with 1/2 is going to be 100. But if we're going in the opposite direction, we kind of have to divide by that value. So we're going to take 400 and we're going to divide it by 1/2. I'm going to put that in parentheses, that 1/2 in parentheses, which you could also write as, half is a decimal format. It would be 0.5. That's fine. And that's going to be 800. Okay, so our 0th term is going to be 800. And yes, technically you could have also gotten that by saying, oh, okay, well here I am dividing by 2, I am dividing by 2, dividing by 2. So opposite of that is multiplying by 2. But we do like to keep everything in terms of a common ratio and what are we multiplying by, okay? So our 0th term, the number that came before 400 in this sequence would have been 800. So if we're writing out a rule for the nth term, we would say, okay, a sub n is equal to, well, our 0th term was 800, and then our common ratio is 1/2, and then it's multiplied to some power of n. So now what we're looking for is we are looking for a sub 7, and what that means is we are looking for the 7th term in this sequence. So let's just imagine, I'm just going to put this on a sticky note. You don't have to write this down, but just imagine our first term is 400. Just going to make a little table. Let's actually do 0. Our 0th term, we said was 800. Our first term is 400. Our second term is 200. Our third term is 100. Now, if I just keep continuing with this, our 4th term, well, we're going to multiply 100 by 1/2. That would be 50. Let's get our 5th term. We're going to multiply by 1/2, ratio of 1/2, and that's going to be 25. Let's get our 6th term, and we're going to multiply 25 with 1/2, and that's going to be 12.5. And then now we want our 7th term. and we're going to multiply by 1/2, and we're going to get 6.25. So let's just make sure, and you could always write this as a table, or you could write this as a list of numbers. Just continue this list instead. You could have done 400, 200, 100, 50, 25, 12.5, 6.25, etc. That would work as well. But instead of doing a list of numbers, because what if I want the 100th term? Well, I don't want to make a table, or I don't want to write out a list of numbers for 100 terms. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to plug 7 into our equation. So we have a sub 7 equals 800 multiplied with 1/2 to the power of 7. So now in our calculator, we'll go ahead and plug this in. Let's get 800, and then we have our common ratio of 1/2, and then let's raise that to the power of 7. And we get 25 over 4, which is okay. That's in fraction form. If we want to get that into decimal form, we got 6.25. And that's what I had when I created my little table of values here, where I made my list of numbers. So let's get that as a sub 7 equals 6.25. Great. Okay, so in our next pattern here, we're starting with 6, then we go to -12, then we go to 24. So if it's not visible easily to you what the next number would be, or what our common ratio is, what is it that we're multiplying? What do I multiply 6 with to get this -12? What do I multiply -12 with to get this -20 or positive 24? If we're not sure, we'll just take our first number. Okay, we're multiplying it with something, and then we're getting our next number. So if we divide by 6 on both sides, all right, our common ratio is -2. So 6 multiplied with -2 is -12. -12 multiplied with a -2 is positive 24, and so forth. So let's just write out our formula for this. Oh, we need our 0th term. And let's go ahead. I'm just going to make a little table here. Off to the side, kind of like we did earlier. So our first term is 6. Our second term is -12. Our third term is 24. So it looks like here we said we are multiplying by a -2, multiplying by a -2. So the opposite, we're going to have to divide by a -2 to get our 0th term here. So we can take 6. We're going to divide it with a -2, and that's going to give us a -3. That'll be our 0th term. Okay, so let's get a sub 0. And we'll get that as -3. So now we can go ahead and write our equation for this. So our equation is going to be a sub n equals, we have our 0th term, that's going to be -3. The common ratio, the value that we're multiplying by each time, is a -2. And then that's to a power of n. So this is how we could write our equation, and this would help us find any term number. So if we want, let's just go ahead and continue this list just to verify we're getting the same amounts. Let's continue this list. Let's get the 4th term, 5th term, 6th term, and 7th term. So for the 4th term, we have 24. Let's multiply by -2. All right, we're going to get -48. Let's multiply by -2 again. 96. Let's multiply by -2 again. -192. And then one last time, 384. So if we plug this into our calculator correctly, we should get 384 for that 7th term. Let's write this out as a sub 7 equals -3 multiplied with our common ratio of -2 to the power of 7. And let's go ahead and put this into our calculator. So we have -3, -2 to the power of 7. Oh, good. And we got 384, because if we continue this list, our 7th term would be 384. So a sub 7 equals 384.